The silver tea service was missing, and Eleanor Washington knew they would blame her before the sunset behind the Montana mountains. She stood in the grand dining room of the Blackwood Ranch, her dark hands trembling as she polished the mahogany table that reflected her worried face like still water. 23 years old and proud as her grandmother had taught her to be, Eleanor had worked in this house for 2 years without so much as a harsh word from the master. But silver had a way of disappearing around colored help, or so the whispers would claim, and whispers in Copper Valley had a way of becoming gospel truth by morning. The late afternoon light slanted through tall windows, casting long shadows across Persian rugs worth more than most families saw in a lifetime. Eleanor moved through the opulent space with practiced grace, her movements efficient and nearly silent. She had learned early to make herself invisible in white houses, to be present when needed and absent when not. But invisibility would not save her now, not with Mrs. Calloway from town spreading poison about uppity colored girls who forgot their place, not with the sheriff already suspicious of every black face in the territory. The sound of boots on the hardwood floor made her stiffen. Heavy steps, confident, belonging to a man who owned everything his eyes could survey. James Blackwood entered the dining room with the bearing of someone accustomed to command, his dark hair slightly disheveled from a day working cattle, his expensive clothes tailored to accommodate broad shoulders earned through actual labor rather than leisure. At 35, he commanded respect from every rancher in the territory, his word carrying the weight of law in a place where might made right. But Eleanor saw something in his steel-gray eyes that others missed, a loneliness that wealth and power could not cure, a searching quality that suggested he was still waiting for life to begin. Their eyes met for a heartbeat longer than propriety allowed. Eleanor dropped her gaze first, as she always did, as she had been taught to do. But in that brief moment, something passed between them that neither could name, something that had been growing in quiet glances and careful conversations over months of shared space. "The Hendersons are coming for dinner tomorrow," James said, his voice carefully neutral. "Mrs. Henderson specifically requested the full silver service." Eleanor's throat tightened. "Yes, sir, I'll see it's properly arranged." She did not mention that the tea service had vanished sometime between morning and afternoon, nor did she voice the dread that sat like ice in her stomach. James studied her face with the intensity that made lesser men uncomfortable. Eleanor kept her expression composed, but he saw the worry she tried to hide, the way her fingers gripped the polishing cloth too tightly. "Eleanor," his voice was softer now, almost gentle, "is everything all right?" The question hung in the air between them, loaded with implications neither dared acknowledge. A white man of his standing did not inquire about the troubles of his black housekeeper, not with genuine concern, not with the kind of warmth that suggested her well-being mattered to him personally. Eleanor felt her carefully constructed walls tremble. "Everything is fine, Mr. Blackwood. Will there be anything else?" James wanted to press, wanted to close the distance between them and demand she tell him what had put that shadow in her dark eyes. Instead, he nodded curtly. "That will be all." After he left, Eleanor sank into one of the dining room chairs, her professional composure finally cracking. She thought of her mother, dead these 5 years, who had cleaned white houses in Atlanta before the war changed everything and nothing at the same time. "Keep your head down, your mouth shut, and your hands clean," her mother had warned. "Their world has no place for proud colored women, baby girl. You forget that, and it'll eat you alive." But Eleanor had not forgotten her place. She had been careful, proper, invisible, and still, someone had stolen the silver and left her to carry the blame. The irony was as bitter as a winter wind. She had fallen in love with James Blackwood, despite every lesson her mother had taught her, despite every warning whispered in the colored quarters of every town she had ever known. Love was a luxury she could not afford, a danger that could destroy them both.
Yet love had taken root anyway, growing in the spaces between their careful words, in the way he asked her opinion on household matters, in the respect he showed her intelligence when he thought no one was watching. Now that love would become her undoing. Someone had planned this carefully, waited for the perfect moment to strike.
Tomorrow's dinner party would bring the most prominent families in the territory to the Blackwood table. They would expect to see their wealth displayed properly, would notice immediately if anything was missing, and Eleanor would be the only suspect, the obvious choice, the natural scapegoat. Outside, storm clouds gathered over the mountains, promising rain that the drought-stricken land desperately needed. Eleanor watched the sky darken and wondered if she would see tomorrow's sunset as a free woman, or if tonight would be her last in this house where she had been happier than she had any right to be. The knock came at the kitchen door just after 10 o'clock, soft but insistent. Eleanor opened it to find Martha Chen, the Chinese laundress who worked for several families in town. Martha's weathered face was tight with worry, her usually perfect English broken by urgency. "They're coming for you tomorrow," Martha whispered, glancing over her shoulder into the darkness. "Miss Calloway, she's been talking all day. Says the silver's missing, says you're the only one who could have taken it." Eleanor's heart sank, though she had expected this news. "Did anyone see who really took it?" "Sheriff Wilson, he don't care about the truth. Easier to blame you than look for the real thief." Martha stepped closer, her voice dropping to barely a whisper. "You've got to run, Eleanor. Tonight, before they come." Running meant abandoning the only home she had known for 2 years, leaving behind the man she loved and admitting guilt she did not carry. But staying meant facing a justice system that had predetermined her guilt based on the color of her skin. Eleanor closed her eyes and felt the weight of impossible choices. "There's more," Martha continued. "I've seen things, heard things. Someone has been watching this house, watching you. Someone with money, someone with influence." Eleanor's blood chilled. "Who?" "Don't know for certain, but Mrs. Calloway has been asking questions about Mr. Blackwood's interest in his help. She don't approve of how he treats you, says it gives other colored folk ideas above their station." Understanding dawned cold and terrible. This was not random theft. This was calculated destruction, designed to remove her from James's house and send a message to any other black woman who might forget her place. Someone with power and prejudice had orchestrated her downfall, had stolen the silver knowing she would bear the blame. Eleanor thanked Martha and closed the door, her mind racing through limited options. She could run and live as a fugitive, always looking over her shoulder. She could stay and face certain conviction. Or she could trust the man she loved with the truth and pray his influence could overcome the territory's ingrained hatred. The choice terrified her, but love made cowards of no one in her family. She would face tomorrow with dignity intact, even if it cost her everything. Upstairs, James paced in his study, whiskey untouched on the desk beside him. Something was wrong with Eleanor, something beyond the usual careful distance she maintained. He had built his fortune on reading people, on sensing danger before it struck, and every instinct screamed that Eleanor was in trouble. The irony was not lost on him. He commanded thousands of acres, employed dozens of men, and held power that stretched across 3 counties. But the one person whose welfare mattered most to him remained beyond his protection, separated by barriers of race and class that seemed insurmountable. He thought of their first meeting 2 years ago. Eleanor had arrived with impeccable references, quiet dignity, and intelligence that shone despite her efforts to hide it. She had transformed his house from a bachelor's rough quarters into something approaching a home, had brought order and grace to spaces that had never known a woman's touch. More than that, she had brought light to corners of his life that had been dark too long. James moved to the window overlooking the valley where his cattle grazed under starlight. He had inherited this ranch from a father who believed might made right, who treated hired help like property,
and saw no contradiction in fighting for Southern independence while living in Montana territory. James had spent his adult life trying to be a better man than his father, trying to build something worthy of respect rather than fear. But respectability meant following society's rules, which meant maintaining a proper distance from his black housekeeper, no matter how much her intelligence challenged him, no matter how her quiet strength drew him like a flame drew moths in the darkness. Tomorrow would bring a dinner party filled with the territory's elite, people whose approval he had spent years cultivating, whose investments in his cattle operation funded his expanding empire.
They would expect to see the natural order maintained and would watch for any sign that James Blackwood had forgotten his place in the hierarchy that kept their world stable and predictable. And Eleanor would serve them with invisible grace, as she always did, pretending not to notice their casual cruelty, their assumption that her intelligence was an aberration, their certainty that she existed for their convenience and comfort. The storm that had been building all evening finally broke, sending rain against the windows in sheets. James watched water run down the glass like tears and wondered what it would cost to protect the woman he loved from a world determined to destroy her. Morning brought Sheriff Wilson and 2 deputies to the kitchen door, their faces set with grim purpose. Eleanor met them with quiet dignity, her hands steady as she untied her apron. She had dressed carefully in her best dress, had arranged her hair with the care of a woman facing judgment. If they were determined to take her dignity, she would not make their task easy. Eleanor Washington. Sheriff Wilson's voice was flat, official. You're under arrest for the theft of silver property belonging to James Blackwood. I did not steal anything, Eleanor said clearly, her voice carrying across the kitchen to where James stood frozen in the doorway. He had come to the kitchen hoping to find her before the sheriff arrived, hoping to warn her and spirit her away somehow. Instead, he watched helplessly as they placed iron shackles around her slender wrists. That's what they all say, Deputy Morrison muttered. His eyes held the particular cruelty of small men given temporary power over someone they considered less than human. Eleanor's gaze found James across the room. For a moment, their eyes held with desperate intensity. She saw his anguish, his fury, his helplessness in the face of legal machinery designed to grind people like her into dust. She saw love there, too, raw and desperate and utterly useless against the weight of law and prejudice. Mr. Blackwood, Sheriff Wilson tipped his hat with mock courtesy. Sorry about this business. Bad help is hard to spot sometimes. We'll get your silver back once she tells us where she hid it. James stepped forward, his voice tight with controlled rage. Eleanor Washington is an exemplary employee. I find it hard to believe she would steal from me. Evidence says otherwise, Wilson replied. Mrs. Calloway saw her acting suspicious yesterday, heard her talking about needing money. Then your silver goes missing. Don't take a genius to figure out what happened. The lies were smooth, practiced, delivered with the confidence of men who knew their version of truth would be accepted without question. Eleanor said nothing, knowing that any protest would only be used as evidence of guilt. They led her past James without ceremony. As she passed, she whispered words meant only for him. The rose garden, beneath the white stones. James's eyes widened slightly, but he gave no other sign of understanding. Eleanor was gambling everything on his love, trusting that he would comprehend her meaning, that he would act on the faith that had grown between them over 2 careful years. Outside, a crowd had gathered despite the early hour. Word traveled fast in small communities, especially word about colored help forgetting their place. Faces filled with righteous satisfaction watched Eleanor's walk of shame, their expressions confirming long-held beliefs about the natural criminality of her race. Mrs. Calloway stood prominently among them, her face a mask of vindicated superiority. She had orchestrated this moment carefully, had spread her poison with strategic precision. Now she watched her handiwork with the satisfaction of someone who had restored proper order to a world gone temporarily askew. Eleanor kept her head high as they loaded her into the wagon that would carry her to jail. She had done nothing wrong, But innocence was a luxury the law did not extend to people like her. Her only hope lay in the man she was leaving behind, the man whose love she had trusted with her life. The wagon rolled away through streets lined with watching faces, carrying Eleanor toward a justice that had never been intended for her benefit. Behind her, James Blackwood stood in his doorway watching the woman he loved disappear into a system designed to destroy her, his fists clenched with impotent rage. But rage would not save Eleanor now. Only truth could do that, and truth was buried in a rose garden beneath white stones, waiting for love to dig deep enough to find it. The territorial jail was a stone box designed to break spirits before trials could begin. Eleanor sat on a narrow cot in the women's section, a space barely large enough for her to lie down, listening to the sounds of despair that echoed off bare walls.
She had been here 3 days. 3 days of stale bread and bitter water. 3 days of watching hope fade like candle flames in winter wind. Through the barred window, she could see the courthouse where her trial would be held tomorrow. Justice would be swift and certain, the verdict predetermined by the color of her skin and the social standing of her accused victim. The territory's legal system had no patience for lengthy deliberation when guilt was so obvious and the defendant so clearly inferior. Visitors were rare in the jail, especially for colored prisoners, so when Deputy Morrison unlocked her cell and announced she had company, Eleanor expected to see Martha Chen or perhaps one of the other Chinese women who cleaned houses in town. Instead, she found herself face to face with Mrs. Victoria Calloway, the banker's wife who had orchestrated her downfall. Mrs. Calloway was a woman of middle years and substantial girth, her expensive dress and elaborate hat marking her as one of the territory's social leaders. She carried herself with the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question, her pale eyes holding the particular coldness reserved for those she considered beneath notice. "Eleanor Washington," Mrs. Calloway's voice dripped false sympathy. "I thought it was my Christian duty to visit you before your trial tomorrow." Eleanor stood but said nothing. Experience had taught her that engaging with white women like Mrs. Calloway was like touching hot coals, painful and dangerous. "I want you to know that I take no pleasure in your situation," Mrs. Calloway continued, settling herself on the cell's single chair with the air of someone conferring a great favor. "But actions have consequences, and you chose to steal from a good Christian man who trusted you." Still, Eleanor remained silent. Mrs. Calloway's eyes narrowed slightly at this lack of response. She was accustomed to colored women who knew their place, who expressed proper gratitude for white attention, even when that attention was hostile. "Of course, there might be a way to avoid the unpleasantness of tomorrow's proceedings," Mrs. Calloway said, her voice taking on a tone of false kindness. "If you were to confess your crime, express proper remorse, perhaps the judge could be persuaded to show mercy." Eleanor finally spoke, her voice steady despite the fear that gnawed at her insides. "I cannot confess to a crime I did not commit." Mrs. Calloway's mask slipped, revealing the hatred beneath her civilized exterior. "Pride, Eleanor, that's always been your problem. Too proud to know your place, too proud to accept the natural order of things." She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Do you think James Blackwood cares what happens to you? Do you think his interest in you means anything beyond what all white men want from colored women?" The words hit Eleanor like physical blows, but she kept her face composed. Mrs. Calloway smiled at her silence. "He's already forgotten you, child, already moved on to more suitable companionship. Mrs. Henderson's daughter is quite lovely, quite appropriate for a man of his standing. The engagement will be announced once this unpleasantness is resolved." Eleanor's heart clenched, but she had expected this. Love between a white cattle baron and his black housekeeper was a fantasy that could not survive contact with reality. She had been a fool to hope otherwise, a fool to trust her heart to a man whose world had no place for women like her. "I see you understand now," Mrs. Calloway said with satisfaction. "Confess tomorrow, and you might avoid hanging. Continue this stubborn pride and—" She let the threat hang unfinished.
After Mrs. Calloway left, Eleanor sat in the gathering darkness and faced the truth of her situation. Tomorrow she would stand trial for a crime she had not committed, defended by no one, supported by no one, facing a justice system designed to ensure her conviction. Hope was a luxury she could no longer afford. But as night settled over the jail, footsteps echoed in the corridor outside her cell. Heavy boots, familiar rhythm, the sound of a man who owned everything his eyes could survey. Eleanor's heart leapt, despite her efforts to remain resigned. James Blackwood stood outside her cell, his face haggard with 3 days of sleepless searching. Deputy Morrison hovered nearby, clearly uncomfortable with allowing this visit, but unable to refuse the territory's most powerful rancher. James gripped the bars with white knuckles, his steel-gray eyes burning with intensity. "Eleanor," his voice was rough with emotion, "I found it." She stared at him, afraid to hope. "Found what?" "The silver tea service, hidden exactly where you said it would be, beneath the white stones in the rose garden." James pulled a piece of paper from his coat.
"Mrs. Calloway's handwriting, detailing the plan to frame you. She hid the evidence in my garden, thinking it would be the last place anyone would look." Eleanor's legs nearly gave way with relief. "You believe me?" "I never doubted you," James said fiercely, "not for a single moment." The truth blazed between them, unspoken but undeniable. Love had triumphed over prejudice, trust over suspicion. James had risked his reputation, his standing in the community, his entire carefully constructed life to prove her innocence. "The trial tomorrow," Eleanor whispered. "There won't be a trial," James said. "Sheriff Wilson is already preparing to release you. Mrs. Calloway has been arrested for theft and conspiracy to commit theft. The truth has a way of coming to light when people care enough to dig for it." Deputy Morrison coughed nervously. "Visiting time's over, Mr. Blackwood." James nodded, but didn't move away from the bars. "Eleanor, when you're free tomorrow, I have something to ask you, something that can't wait any longer." She met his gaze, seeing her desperate hope reflected in his eyes. "What?" "Marry me." The words hung in the air between them, impossible and inevitable at the same time. Eleanor's heart soared, even as her mind catalogued all the reasons such a union could never work, could never be accepted, could never survive in a world built on racial division. "James," she whispered, "you know what that would mean, for both of us." "I know what it would mean to lose you," he replied. "I've spent 3 days watching them try to destroy you for something you didn't do, watching a system designed to crush people like you simply because of the color of your skin. I won't spend the rest of my life watching from the sidelines while the world tries to break the woman I love." Eleanor felt tears she had not allowed herself to shed for 3 days finally spill over. "The community will never accept it. Your friends, your business associates—" "Then they were never really my friends," James said simply. "Eleanor, I don't want to live in a world that requires me to choose between love and respectability. If I have to choose, I choose love." Through the barred window, dawn was beginning to break over the mountains. A new day was coming, bringing freedom and possibilities that Eleanor had not dared imagine. The path ahead would not be easy. They would face ostracism, hatred, and violence from those who could not accept their love. But they would face it together, as partners, as equals, as two people who had found something worth fighting for in a world determined to keep them apart. "Yes," Eleanor whispered. "Yes, I'll marry you." James reached through the bars to touch her hand, their fingers intertwining despite the iron between them. Love had triumphed over law, truth had defeated prejudice, and hope had survived the darkest hour. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but it would also bring freedom, justice, and the beginning of a love story that would defy every convention their world held sacred.
If this tale of unexpected love, born from the darkest of circumstances, touched your heart, if you believe that even in the harshest frontier towns, true love can bloom where least expected, then you've found your home with Maverick Hearts. Here, we bring you more than just romance. We bring you the raw truth of survival, the quiet strength of those who refuse to be broken, and the kind of love that rises from ashes to build something beautiful and lasting. If stories like this one stir something profound in your soul, if you hunger for more tales of redemption on the untamed frontier, make sure to show this story some love with a like. Hit that subscribe button so you never miss another journey into the wild heart of the American West, where love was hard-won but worth fighting for. And don't forget to hit that notification bell, because every week we're bringing you new stories of courage, passion, and the unbreakable human spirit that tamed a continent, one heart at a time.